It was a Tuesday morning in December. December 9, 2008. Cold the way Chicago gets cold, the kind that comes off the lake and gets into your bones before you even open the door. Rod Blagojevich woke up that morning as the sitting governor of the state of Illinois. By the time most people had finished their morning coffee, federal agents were at his door. He did not see it coming. That is the part worth sitting with. Not the arrest itself, but the fact that a man who had been under federal investigation for years, a man whose own advisors had told him to be careful, a man who had every reason in the world to know that people were watching him, woke up that morning and apparently still did not believe this day would ever actually come. They arrested him at his home in the Ravenswood neighborhood, a regular house on a regular street. His wife was there. His daughters were there. He was in his jogging clothes, and when the agents came in, the governor of Illinois went with them. What they had on those tapes was something that prosecutors would later call a political corruption crime spree. But that phrase does not really tell you what was happening. What was happening was simpler and older and more recognizable than any legal term. A man with power had decided that his power was a product, and he was selling it. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. Rod Blagojevich grew up on the northwest side of Chicago. His father was a Serbian immigrant who worked in a factory. His mother cleaned homes. They were not wealthy people. They were people who worked hard and believed that America rewarded hard work, and they passed that belief on to their son. By all accounts, Rod was charming from early on. He was the kind of kid who talked easily to everyone, who remembered names, who made you feel like he was genuinely interested in you. That is a real skill. It is also, as it turns out, an extremely useful skill in politics. He played football in high school, went to Northwestern, got a law degree from Pepperdine, married the daughter of a powerful Chicago alderman named Dick Mell, and that last detail matters more than almost anything else in this story, because it was Dick Mell who opened the doors that got Rod Blagojevich into politics in the first place. He won a seat in the Illinois state legislature in 1992, won a congressional seat in 1996, and in 2002 he became the first Democrat-elected governor of Illinois in 26 years. He was 45 years old. He was handsome. He had good hair, and he knew it. He quoted Elvis. He quoted Rudyard Kipling. He liked to talk about his working-class roots even as he was building a political machine that ran on money and favors. People who worked with him in those early years described someone who was genuinely likable but who also had a very particular way of seeing the world. He believed he was special, not in a quiet, private way, in a loud, constant way. He believed the normal rules of politics, the grinding work, the coalition building, the compromise, those were for people who were not as talented as he was. And here is where it starts, not in some dramatic moment, not the day he decided to commit a crime. It starts in the small daily decisions, the corner cut here, the favor traded there, the phone call made to someone who owed you something. Chicago politics had a long tradition of this kind of exchange, and Blagojevich did not invent it. He just took it further than most people thought someone would actually go. By his second term as governor, his administration was already under federal scrutiny. His approval ratings were collapsing. His relationship with the state legislature had completely broken down. He had not visited his official office in Springfield in months. He would fly back from Chicago for votes and fly right back home. He was governing almost by telephone. And still, he believed he was untouchable. To understand what Blagojevich was actually doing, you have to understand what a governor controls. And it is a lot. State contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, appointments to boards and commissions, the ability to sign or veto legislation that could make or break industries. And in Illinois, when a U.S. Senate seat opens up, the governor appoints the replacement. Blagojevich and his circle had been treating these powers as a revenue stream for years before the Senate seat became the headline. There were allegations involving a children's hospital. A pediatric hospital had applied for a state grant. The grant had been approved by state health officials, but the money did not come through. And according to investigators, it did not come through because the hospital's chief executive had not made a sufficient contribution to Blagojevich's campaign fund. When a fundraiser close to Blagojevich contacted the hospital about a donation, the money was raised, and the grant was released shortly after. There were road projects, there were racetrack legislation votes, there were state board appointments that investigators say were put up for sale. The pattern was consistent. Someone needed something the governor controlled. Someone connected to the governor made contact. Money moved. Things happened. This was not subtle. Federal investigators had been building a case for years. Patrick Fitzgerald, the U.S. attorney in Chicago, the same man who had prosecuted the previous Illinois governor George Ryan for corruption, had Blagojevich's phones tapped, his office tapped, his conversations recorded. And Blagojevich kept talking. That is the part that people who followed this case still find stunning. He knew there was heat on him. His chief of staff, John Harris, knew. His advisors knew. And yet on those recorded phone calls, Blagojevich spoke with a comfort and an openness that suggested he either did not believe anyone was actually listening, or he did not care. When Barack Obama won the presidential election in November 2008 and vacated his Illinois Senate seat, Blagojevich saw an opportunity. In his mind, and on those tapes, he said it plainly. The Senate seat was a valuable thing. He was not going to just give it away for nothing. He wanted something in return. On those recordings, he talked about wanting to be appointed to a cabinet position. He talked about wanting to run a nonprofit with a substantial salary. He talked about wanting his wife Patricia placed on corporate boards. He mentioned wanting campaign contributions. At one point he said, and these are his words captured on federal wiretaps, that the Senate seat was a valuable thing, that it was golden, and that he was not giving it up for nothing. He reached out to representatives of various candidates. He had conversations about what was available. He floated the idea of appointing himself to the seat so he could run for higher office later. His inner circle was aware of what was happening. Some pushed back. Most went along. He also, during the same period, allegedly tried to use his power over state advertising contracts with a major newspaper to pressure that newspaper's editorial board into firing writers who had been critical of him. A newspaper. He was trying to strong-arm a newspaper's editorial board using state money. The tapes captured all of it. The calculations, the negotiations, the complaints when things were not moving fast enough, the frustration when Obama's team made clear they were not going to play ball. What you hear on those recordings is not a criminal mastermind. You hear a man who had been operating inside a transactional system for so long that he genuinely seemed to believe this was just how things worked, that everyone did this, that the difference between him and other politicians was just that he was more honest with himself about it. That is not uncommon. That is the thing worth paying attention to. When a person normalizes something over years, they stop being able to see it clearly. The behavior does not feel criminal anymore. It feels like business. It feels like the way the world actually runs underneath all the official language. And by the time someone tries to tell them they have gone too far, they cannot even locate the line they crossed because they stopped being able to see it a long time ago. The federal investigation into Blagojevich had been running since at least 2003. That is 5 years. 5 years of building a case while the man continued to operate, continued to make calls, continued to treat his office like a marketplace. Some of the people around him became cooperating witnesses. His former chief of staff, his deputy governor, fundraisers, people who had been inside the operation and who, when faced with the reality of federal charges, made the choice that most people make in that situation. They started talking. His father-in-law, Dick Mell, the alderman who had helped launch his career, had a falling out with him years earlier and made public statements suggesting that Blagojevich was engaged in improper fundraising practices. The relationship between them collapsed entirely. The man who had given him his start in politics was, by the end, one of his loudest critics. His approval rating in Illinois fell to 13%. That is not a typo. 13%. Even in a state that had elected him twice, even among Democrats who should have been his base, the number was historic in how low it went. The state legislature began impeachment proceedings before the federal arrest even happened. And still he kept going. There is a particular kind of person who, when they see the walls closing in, does not slow down. They speed up. They make more calls. They push harder. They take bigger risks because in their mind the only way out is through. Blagojevich was that kind of person. The tapes from the last weeks before his arrest capture someone who is not being careful, someone who is negotiating loudly, someone who seems almost constitutionally unable to stop. Patrick Fitzgerald and his team had been patient. They had let the investigation run. They had let the tapes roll. And then, in December 2008, they made the decision to move. The reason they gave publicly was that the Senate seat negotiation had reached a point where they could not let it continue without someone actually being harmed. A Senate seat was about to be sold or something close to it, and they had to step in. The morning they arrested him, Fitzgerald called it a political corruption crime spree. He said the conduct would make Abraham Lincoln, who was from Illinois, roll over in his grave. That line made every newspaper in the country. Blagojevich's response to all of it was remarkable in its own way. He did not go quiet. He did not retreat. He went on television. He went on talk shows. He quoted poetry. He compared himself to various historical figures who had been persecuted unjustly. He made the media rounds with an energy that some people found baffling and that others found, in a dark way, oddly compelling. He genuinely seemed to believe he could talk his way out of it. That if he just explained himself clearly enough, if he just stayed visible and likable and quotable, the public would come around. That is who he had always been. The guy who could work any room. And he was still trying to work this one even as the evidence against him was sitting in a federal archive somewhere being organized into trial exhibits. The first trial in 2010 ended in a partial result. The jury convicted him on one count of lying to federal investigators, but could not reach a verdict on the remaining counts. It was not the outcome prosecutors wanted, but it was enough to confirm that the case was real and moving forward. The second trial in 2011 was different. The jury heard the tapes. When you hear someone in their own voice saying what Blagojevich said on those recordings, the work of the prosecution becomes significantly easier. He was convicted on 17 of 20 counts of federal corruption charges including wire fraud, attempted extortion, and bribery. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. He reported to prison in 2012. His wife Patricia, who had also been investigated but not charged, remained in Chicago with their daughters. He served about 8 years of his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Colorado. In February 2020, President Donald Trump commuted his sentence. Trump said at the time that the 14-year sentence had been excessive and that Blagojevich had been treated unfairly by the same prosecutor, Patrick Fitzgerald, who Trump also had other conflicts with. Blagojevich walked out of prison after 8 years. He came home to Chicago. He held a press conference. He was still talking, still performing. He said he was a changed man. He said the experience had given him perspective. He said he wanted to help people who had been treated unjustly by the federal system. Whether any of that is true, only he knows. What is true is that his law license had been revoked. He cannot practice law. He is permanently barred from holding public office in Illinois. The political career that he had built over 2 decades is gone. The legacy that he might have had as the governor who broke the Republican hold on Illinois, who came from working-class immigrant roots and made it all the way to the top, that is not the story people tell about Rod Blagojevich. This is the story they tell. Every person in this story made choices. Blagojevich made choices. The fundraisers who made the calls made choices. The people who sat in rooms where these conversations happened and said nothing made choices. But here is what this story is really about. It is not about a uniquely corrupt man in a uniquely corrupt city. Chicago has a real history with political corruption, but what happened here is not a Chicago story. It is a human story. It is about what happens when a person gets used to a system where favors are currency, where everyone around you treats access and influence as things to be traded, where the line between a legitimate campaign contribution and a bribe is genuinely blurry at the edges. When you live inside that system long enough, your sense of where the line is shifts. It shifts a little at a time, and nobody around you is drawing it clearly because they are all working inside the same fog. Most people reading this are not governors. Most people will never have a Senate seat to sell. But most people have been in a workplace or a family or a community where the rules were bent quietly, where small corruptions were treated as normal, where the person who said, "Wait a minute, this is not right," was the one who got looked at sideways. You have probably seen that. You may have been part of it without ever thinking of it in those terms. That is where this story lives, not in the dramatic wiretapped phone calls, in the hundred smaller moments that happened before anyone turned on a recording device. The first time someone asked for something they should not have asked for and got it. The first time someone decided that what was in their interest and what was right were the same thing because it was easier to believe that. Blagojevich is not a monster. He is not some creature from outside ordinary human experience. He is what happens when ambition and entitlement get into a system with no real friction and stay there long enough to become invisible to the person carrying them. The next time you are in a room where someone in charge starts treating the resources around them like they belong to them personally, where the rules seem to apply to everyone except the person at the top, where small favors get exchanged in ways that everyone pretends are just how things work, pay attention to that room. That is usually where these stories start, and they almost never end cleanly.